All right, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us for our Radio Shop chat here today. My name is Nick Lanneman. I'm a faculty member in electrical engineering at Notre Dame, and I'm serving as Center Director for SpectrumX. We let the slides scroll through here quite a bit today, so probably you know about SpectrumX, and you know the key thing to remember is that these Radio Shop chats are conducted under the Chatham House rule, so you're welcome to use the information, but without attribution and without permission of the speakers. We're excited today to have this panel. We're thankful to all the panelists, but especially to Professor Jeff Reed from Virginia Tech for helping organize the panel. As many of you know, Jeff is a chaired professor at Virginia Tech, founding director of wireless at Virginia Tech, active researcher, longtime contributor on spectrum policy issues. And he's actually been involved in several pretty innovative spectrum-related startups. So I couldn't think of a better person.
Looks like we're getting closer. My colleagues hopefully will be here shortly. Otherwise, I'll just.
Sorry.
I'll also try not to mute myself. But we.
So let me just say I couldn't think of a better moderator for this particular panel, and Jeff put this together on pretty short notice. So thank you to Jeff and all the panelists. I'll just hand it over to you all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nick. And it's a pleasure to run this panel. So far, we have 3 of the 4 panelists here, and I could hear Eric in the background, or our 4th one. Hopefully he will join us very soon. So we're going to be talking about how academics can impact spectrum policy. And I believe this panel is going to be very, very useful for academics to have some other way to provide impact to the community, in addition to just writing papers and graduating students. So we have a very distinguished panelist, and I will be posing questions to them. And at the end, we will take questions from the audience. So, but first of all, let me have each one of the panelists say a little bit about themselves. Eric, are you online and can you hear me? Guess not. Well, let's start with Nick.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Nick, just a spectrum engineer from NTIA. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh boy, Nick is one of the key people at NTIA that people look to for technical advice. John, you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm John Peha. I'm an engineering professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and I've spent most of my career as an academic, but I've also been in industry as a CTO, and I've done this in government. I was the chief technologist at the Federal Communications Commission. I was at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I was on the House Energy and Commerce Committee staff, and I ran a telecom program at USAID.
You've done just about everything. Ira.
Sure. Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. So I'm Ira Keltz. I'm Deputy Chief of the FCC's Office of Engineering and Technology. Just real quick, I've been with the government the better part of the last 28 and a half years or so, in all parts of the commission. Our private radio bureau, when that still existed, became our wireless bureau. And then in the engineering office, in our policy and rules division, our electromagnetic compatibility division, and I've now been helping to run the office for the last dozen or so years. Thanks.
Thank you, Ira. Well, let's get on with the questions. John, I have a question for you. How have you in the past, wearing your professor hat, and I know you wear many hats, have you been able to contribute to the discussion on spectrum?
I was a professor before I did any of those other things for quite some time. I mean, I was thinking back and actually we were preparing for this session of sort of when I have tried to influence spectrum policy as a professor. I think, first of all, I think that there are lots of things that matter, but I think the two most important things are whether you pick the right problem to work on. Is it policy relevant? Did you frame it in a way policymakers would? Is it at the right time? And then how did you disseminate it? And I was thinking of two examples from the 2000s, both of which I think I picked relevant problems, but have very different dissemination stories. One of which was, there was a crazy idea that there's this spectrum for television that, maybe you could allow low power transmitters into that band. And is that a good idea or a bad idea? And I had some students working on that, and we came up with some interesting results. So there is something that the FCC would have cared about. And in that one, I did what a professor normally does, which is I, of course, went to an IEEE conference to present it. And that's a good thing to be doing, presenting at IEEE conferences. I did actually talk to some folks at the FCC. Can't remember if I was smart enough to talk to IRA, but I didn't do very much to interact directly with the FCC. So I had to hope, and sometimes this works, that say one of the companies that was trying to influence the FCC would take my work to the FCC. In contrast, something I did a lot in the 2000s was work on communication systems for first responders, firefighters, paramedics, police. This was my reaction to 9/11 when those systems failed at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon. And we spent years and years. I learned a lot of stuff. I learned that when everybody said we had not enough spectrum, actually the problem was that public safety used spectrum really, really inefficiently. I learned that, spectrum was allocated in small regions and it really should be large regions, ideally nationwide. I learned that there were tremendous benefits of combining government infrastructure and commercial. It was better than either alone. And this is sort of the underpinnings of what is now FirstNet. So to my students, they did the same thing. They published in journals, they published in conferences, they graduated and went home. But I spent an awful lot of time disseminating. I spent an awful lot of time in DC, more on Capitol Hill than the FCC, but also the FCC. And I would learn later, I had no way of knowing at the time that influenced decisions, that people at high levels knew about this work. And I think if you have time for that, it makes an enormous difference.
Oh, great. Well, I see Eric joined us. Eric, could you say a couple of sentences about yourself?
Sure. And in fact, I'll preface it with, I'm talking to you from the National Press Club down in downtown DC. And the reason I'm here is, as John said, you talk at IEEE conferences, but what many academics may or may not be aware of is IEEE has a US-focused organization called, appropriately enough, IEEE USA. And every year we put together what are called Congressional Visits Day. That event is actually tomorrow, where we go around, visit our congressional delegation. I would encourage all of you for next year to register and come. It's one of the most direct ways of not just influencing, but just networking with people and stumbling into finding out that just through conversations, the stuff that you're working on is actually important. So for me personally, I'm a professor at Virginia Tech, and I previously did serve in the White House as the Assistant Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy for Telecommunications and Cybersecurity, and I was also a former CTO of the FCC.
Great, thanks. That sounds really very much like an interesting event. Hey, Ira and Nick, do you see events coming up that you think academics might be able to contribute to the policy discussion?
So maybe I'll jump in, and I kind of maybe want to, before I directly answer that, just comment a bit on what John and Eric and what they said. And John talked, and Eric being at the IEEE USA conference, and those conferences are really important to researchers, of course, because you want to disseminate among your peers. The problem in the policy world is the policymakers don't always connect with those conferences. They live in a different world. And then it becomes, how do you connect that world to the policy world? And it's not always easy, because you're not necessarily keyed into what's happening. So with that, at least at the commission, and Nick, the other Nick, will join, talk about at NTIA, because it's a little bit different focus. But we do all our work through the rulemaking process, which by law is completely transparent, out in the open. Everything is filed in a public record and available for review and comment. So that being said, one of the things we would always be looking for is, if folks could connect to some of the work we're doing on the policy side, and if there's academic work going on, to file that in our record, and come and meet with us, talk to us, tell us what you're doing, describe it, because we, in the engineering office, we could take that technical work and see how we can distill that down to fit into the regulatory framework that we live in. And what we're always looking for, first and foremost, how do we promote new technology, new tech, more efficiency, and how do we enable new services to get out there while protecting existing incumbent services, or figuring out how to accommodate those services. So maybe I'll stop there, and we can kind of talk about this in more detail as we over the next hour. Nick?
Well, I've got a question for you, but I wanted to follow up with your follow-up.
Sure.
Do you proactively go out and find academics and to talk with them and get their advice?
So that's actually a really good question. So in the past, we had done a pretty good job of trying to cull through some of the research and find folks who are doing things, and then try to have people come in and do brown bag lunches, maybe talk for an hour, tell us about their research. We have not done a really good job of that in the last couple of years. Certainly through the COVID years, everything fell apart. And that's something I would really like to see us get better at. So to the audience out there, I'll give an invitation. If you think you have relevant research that would be good for us to hear about, shoot me an email. It's ira.keltz@fcc.gov. And we'll see if we can start organizing some of these brown bag lunches, whether they're a monthly basis or whatnot, so that we can get our engineers at the commission and a bunch of the non-engineers too, to hear some of what's happening out in the academic world that can really help us. And we could then also provide some feedback on some of the things that we might, you might be able to do that would help us on some of the issues currently in front of us.
Great. Okay. And Nick and Ira, do you see any events coming up that you think academics might be able to contribute to the policy discussion?
Nick, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks again for having me. I thought John hit it on the head with finding the right problem, right? Sometimes it feels like, we have a square peg and we're looking for a round hole and we're trying to shove it in there. So you'll have to forgive me. It's been 10 years since I've been in grad school. But yeah, that's at least how I kind of remembered it. We have a solution. We're trying to find the problem for it. And yeah, if we could maybe just reverse that. Yes. Come work with us, right? Come find the problems that we're trying to solve, and then go work on that. There are a few opportunities, at least at NTIA, for academics to work through. The easiest is probably for students first. We do have paid internships for different levels, whether you're a PhD student or even an undergrad. Yeah, come work with us during the summer, go back to school, work remotely, keep working with us. Yeah, that's always been a great thing, right? We have MATLAB and we have measurements, right? If you love hiking in the Rockies, go to Colorado, go to ITS, make some measurements. If you love DC and you love museums during the summer, come to DC. So those are two, that's a very specific opportunity that we do have for you. Yeah, and I think we'll just end it there, but yeah, that's at least one very specific opportunity.
Well, that's an interesting point about the internships, and I know faculty who have also gone there during the summer and have worked.
Yeah.
Do you use graduate students as a conduit to, let's say, engage with faculty members?
At least for us, there's two ways we engage with academia. First is through NSF. So NSF does a great job at linking us in with things like nerds. We review proposals. We're on those meetings. So NSF does a great job at connecting us to the community. And yeah, we're always trying to find those pipelines to the different universities, at least in the area, or even if you're outside of the area, in a way to connect with academia. So that's the two ways that we're trying.
Okay. Ira, do you have any comments on that? Do you see any events coming up that you think academics might be able to contribute to the policy discussion?
Yeah, so I might answer that a little bit differently, not so much in the realm of events, but more of what's happening at the commission. So, as I mentioned, we were kind of through the rulemaking process. And actually, if I could take a step back, because I'm not sure folks in the academic world completely understand how the regulatory environment is laid out. So we do have two agencies that do spectrum management, the FCC and NTIA. And NTIA is part of the administration, a part of Department of Commerce, and handles spectrum management for federal government agencies. The FCC is an independent government agency. We report to Congress. We're not part of the administration, and we handle regulation for the commercial sector or anything that's non-federal, including state and local governments, and generally the commercial sector is the way folks always look at it. So because of that, we have different focuses, and we do operate in kind of slightly different ways. But we do provide a lot of information on our website about what is happening at the commission. There's a daily email that goes out on what the commission has released any given day, including things like new proposals for rulemaking and things of that nature, speeches that the chairwoman might make of things we're interested in. So for example, we always have a lot going on. Some of the big things at the moment are things like we're putting out a policy statement on looking at receiver standards and how to better treat things like that. So research kind of on some of what's in the what's in the realm of practical, affordable filters, both on the receiver side and the transmitter side, in order to be able to get more efficient, pack more users, more base stations and into smaller areas. Because part of the other problem we have is we've auctioned a lot of spectrum in the last 10, 15 years. There's not that much left as far as available spectrum to auction. So how do we get more efficient? Research in those areas is certainly helpful. Propagation is always helpful. The models we use tend to be kind of old, and having more validation updates would be great. Antenna technology, that is really helpful to us to understand, again, how we can better help licensees engineer systems in. We've got things going on with satellite, providing connectivity to handsets from satellite without any additional technology. There's a lot of interference issues because now you have you've got radio links crossing all kinds of different geographic boundaries of different licensees. How do you manage that process? And then the big one that seems to be pervasive is, how do you share spectrum? How do you allow multiple licensees, whether through a true cognitive radio, or lately we've been relying on databases, and then that actually keys into AI. How do you enable AI with databases in a system that can then manage radios or otherwise in a very, very complex way to allow a tremendous amount of efficiency. So again, there's a huge realm of things. So rather than any specific events, it's more helping us with what is in front of us today. And then with that, I will mention we do also have some internships. Currently, we don't have paid internships for engineers, but we are working on that. I just spoke to our admin folks, and we are trying to break some money loose to be able to have some paid internships. But if folks are interested, there's info on our website.
Okay, here's the question for all the panelists. How would you suggest faculty who have not contributed to the discussion of the past become engaged?
If I may.
Sure, go right ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so as Ira said, the FCC regularly publishes things called notices of inquiry, notices of proposed rulemaking. This is all part of how rules get made, the APA. You don't need to be a lawyer to respond to these things. They're in fact probably more valuable to have just what the technology is, not necessarily taking a side. NTIA, well, not as regularly, but puts out requests for comments. And that's actually an opportunity. And in fact, I've done things like, here's my IEEE paper with like maybe a letter on top of it saying this is why it's relevant to this particular proceeding. So it's not like, again, you have to take time out to do something special. And I can say, one of the FCC orders that I had put comments in on, I was quoted 14 times in the order. Now, 12 of those times were, yeah, we see your point, but we disagree. And 2 of the times are like, yeah, we see your point, we agree, so we're going to, take your advice. So that's important. The other thing, and again, people don't quite understand this. I didn't really fully internalize it until I was inside at the FCC, which was where the lawyers at the FCC had, drafted up a rule, and, I reviewed it and I was like, this like defies physics and, doesn't, relate to reality. And they said, well, there's nothing in the record to say that this defies physics. So, I called up some friends and I didn't say, please tell us it defies physics. I just said, take a look at this and, just tell us what you think. And, quickly we had 25, well-reasoned arguments of what reality was. That's part of the, and that's where you get these things where people say, oh, the FCC has done something really weird, or NTIA has done something really weird. It's where a creature of the laws that put us together, but really it's where, there can be a lot of help. So no, I would say, it's kind of like in Numbers in the Bible, it's not up on some mountain or at the bottom of some sea. You can just file through the electronic filing system. So yeah, I would encourage that.
Oh yeah, I've always had my graduate students take the lead on it because it's a good educational activity for them.
Yeah, and I would just note that, as Eric said, one of the drawbacks of the system, I mean, it's a good system because everything is public, but if we don't have public support for things, so if we make a proposal and people kind of disagree but don't back it up with support, or even if folks agree or want certain changes, we still need a well-reasoned argument for why. And we cannot just, once we propose it and that's out there and that now it's kind of in stone, to change that, we need public support. Otherwise, our lawyers basically say there's no record for making a change from what we proposed. Therefore, we must stick with that, even if we know it's probably not the best thing to do. So, so in a sense, the law is good. It protects the public from the government doing something just by fiat. On the other hand, it is limiting because we're limited in what we can do, even if we know that where we're headed might not be the best solution. So it's always great for folks to get involved and let us know. And if there's some great research and papers out there that would provide an opportunity for us to review and say, hey, look, based on this research that's happening, we can make a different decision or change our decision or modify it in some way. That's great, but we need that paper to be submitted into that public record. We can't necessarily just say it's out there, therefore we're going to go with it. It has to be part of our proceeding.
I think John had.
Actually, I guess so. Ira, what I've learned is if the laws of physics were not read into the, were not officially submitted into the record, you don't have to follow them. Is that no?
I would hope we wouldn't be as dumb as to do something like that. But I know where Eric's coming from on some of this stuff too.
What I was going to say, I agree with that as a way to get ideas of work to do. That is where some of mine come from. I spent 2022, for example, doing research project related to broadband labeling. That is specifically because the FCC started a proceeding on broadband labeling. But some of it doesn't work that way. If you're a researcher, you are thinking further ahead than the FCC is. You can see where the technology and the science is going. For example, we've all known that the engineers are using higher and higher frequencies for a very long time. Anyone could see that coming before the day that the FCC realized I now need to start thinking about millimeter wave band spectrum. Everyone, so you can sometimes look at the technology and see that this is coming if you think about, in addition to the technical implications of whatever it is I'm doing, what are going to be the policy and regulatory implications.
Right. So let me throw a couple things out there. So if you are looking at things that are futuristic, are out there, come and talk to us. Let us know what you're looking at. Just set up a meeting. It doesn't have to be part of a proceeding. We are interested in what's going on in the academic and the research world for what might be hitting in 5 or 6 or 7 years. Because if we know about that, maybe we could do something now to pave the way, to make it smoother once that technology or protocol, or methodologies or whatever it is becomes more mature. So that's one thing. The other, you mentioned higher and higher frequencies. I mean, just this morning, I had a conversation with somebody. We're talking about what more could the commission do to promote new tech above 95 gigahertz, above 100 gigahertz. And it's something the commission worked on a number of years ago to try and spur the community. And we adopted a very loose set of rules without really codifying much, simply because we said, we don't know where this is going. We're going to provide an opportunity for folks to develop, and then we'll reevaluate in a number of years and see if we need to do anything more based on where the technology is going. So in a way, we were trying to kind of pave the way, create a sandbox, so to speak, for folks to try stuff out. To date, I don't know how much is really happening up there, but we can do things like that. And again, making sure folks understand how much different the physics, the propagation, the way things happen above 100 gigahertz versus below is really important. Not everybody here understands that. So, and 6G, and, all these things are happening, but nothing's happening tomorrow. So educating us today with where you think things are going based on the research in 3, 4, 5 years is really valuable to us, so that we can do the work now and not be playing catch up down the road.
Yeah, and I guess I would be remiss without saying, of course, currently NTIA has a listening tour coming to Notre Dame for the spectrum strategy. So that is also that's a very practical way to impact spectrum strategy, right? Yeah, we'd love to hear your ideas. Yeah, ideas sometimes are not enough, right? So it does take some work past that. But yeah.
So Ira and Nick, can you relay any situations that you've seen in the past where academics had an impactful dialogue with the FCC or NTIA on spectrum-related issues?
Well, John mentioned his idea of sharing low-power unlicensed devices in the TV spectrum. And when my boss walked into my office and said, "What do you think of this idea?" I told him he was nuts. But then we, as we talked about it, that it did become reality. We created, white space devices, which did not meet much commercial success in the U.S. to date for a number of reasons. But globally is doing pretty well. But that became the precursor to our Citizens Band radio service,
Mhm.
which is a first kind of, in fact, globally fully dynamic, database-driven radio service where no user has any rights to any specific spectrum, and use is assigned on an as-needed basis, based on a bit of a priority system and a protection system. So that idea that John started with a number of years ago, socialized, hit somebody's ear, that then basically morphed several times into something that right now is just a service that's growing by leaps and bounds. So I mean, that's maybe a bit of a not necessarily a linear progression, but that's kind of how things sometimes happen around here.
Yeah, we never know where ideas will go. And I agree with Ira. Spectrum sharing, TV white space was the precursor to CBRS, and we'll see if that can continue to evolve, right? That, of course, gave us 6 gigahertz AFC, right? How that, there's other ways that could also be applicable to other bands, right? So it's very interesting once we start getting those ideas out and then actually working on them.
Right. Well, right now we have a notice of proposed rulemaking out in the 5 gigahertz band for control of drones. And that also is one of the proposals is, should that be enabled through a database? And how would that work? How could it work? What are the different factors that you would, especially for controlling, over the horizon, once, you lose line of, you lose visual sight for control. So, again, there's, these ideas morph into various things, and, and what works, we do try to replicate, but we also know that there are always better ways to do things, and there's a lot of smart people out there. So, we're always looking for ideas on how do we make this better? How do we make it work? Because, as we can see the commercial sector grow, it's good for the country, certainly. And that's what we're always trying to do, is make sure we provide opportunities to see economic growth, and for the U.S. we've been recognized as a global leader in tech, and basically to keep our place there and keep leading, because it's just good policy and good economics and good science.
Great. Question for John and Eric. How do your universities reward or recognize you for this engagement on spectrum policy? Does this activity help with NSF grants?
I would like to give a happier answer. I don't think they want to punish me for it. I don't think I am strongly rewarded. In NSF grants, you do get to write about broader impact. But I don't think, but frankly, it is backwards in that I do research in order to have impact on the world. If it wasn't having impact on the world, I could do crossword puzzles instead of other kinds of research. This is what makes it worthwhile for me. So in that sense, it is enormously rewarding, but I'm not sure I would say either the university or the NSF have added to that reward.
Yeah, and in fact, I had the same thinking almost identical. It's like, well, they didn't penalize me for it. And in fact, my institution did help a little with the disparity between the salary of a government employee and a full professor. And they, most important, they allowed the time because it is, effectively a full-time commitment for, usually 2 years. And again, also like John, what got me in, why did I take the cut in salary? Because even with the university support, my total salary from other sources was entirely wiped out because you can't consult when you're doing the government service. But what got me there in the first place is I had been working on a particular technology dealing with illegal robocall mitigation. And going in, it was like, oh, industry's stupid. They could even, in fact, save money and make everybody happier if they just deployed it. Why aren't they deploying it? And the answer was because it was a particular kind of technology that everyone needed to do it. And you had economic incentive to be last, which is the whole point of regulation. Regulation is required when we want to distort the market such that we have a societal good. And that's what, got me in the door, was seeing that technology deployed, and it is now fairly ubiquitously deployed. I will put in the pitch that while I was there, an item came up that is my most proud accomplishment, 988, the suicide prevention hotline. I didn't go saying, oh, I'm going to bring this to the world. It wasn't even a thing to me. And while I was there, the item came up and I was appalled by what our system was before 988 and really being able to make a difference and cutting through a lot of some misinformation, scare information, all that was being put around of how we couldn't possibly do it, to where now it is 988. I'll say it again, 988. If you know someone or you yourself have any issues, just dial 988. You don't get to do that in academia. You don't get to do that even in a corporation. It's a thing that is kind of uniquely situated in government service.
Yeah, and one thing, if I could just mention, I know I talk a lot about spectrum because that's the area I generally work in. But John mentioned that he had worked on broadband labeling issues, and it was certainly in front of the commission. Eric's talking about 988 and robocalls. So don't think we're so narrowly focused just spectrum. I don't want to give that impression either. There are a whole host of issues in front of the commission dealing with all kinds of different parts of the network, as well as the spectrum issues. So it is not limiting in any way, shape, or form. So if there's relevant research, relevant projects on any of those areas, folks would certainly be looking, would be interested in hearing about it.
Well, I want to take a few minutes to run some questions by you from our audience. Here's one question. given that federal grants can't be used to fund activities that can be considered lobbying, how are academics supposed to pay for such visits to DC, talking to policymakers, listening, networking, etc.? Perhaps some how-tos would be useful.
Since Nick went on his recruitment campaign, you could work at a university based in DC or Northern Virginia, like the Arlington campus of Virginia Tech, in which case it's a metro ride. But no, in all seriousness, that's absolutely correct. That I won't give how-tos because I am not a lawyer. Do check with your counsel at your university. But while lobbying is unquestionably prohibited, education is part of the NSF's mission. And so, like, if you go to a congressperson and say, here are the issues in spectrum sharing, as an example, and basically this is what the physics is, period. And you don't say, and therefore I want you to vote for this bill, or I want you to, propose this. As long as you keep it on the education side, it's actually part of outreach and broader impacts. And then they also kind of love to hear that their NSF funds that they pay for are actually doing useful stuff. So no, that can be very much an excused expense. John, you have thoughts on it?
I'll second that and take it further. Yeah, first of all, I've met, at least before COVID, I met with policymakers all the time, not so much since, or Zoom now more, but and I never lobby. I am not representing anyone. I am not taking money to be there. It is absolutely not lobbying. It's me telling what I know and what I don't know. I'm also, and I'm also very careful to say what I don't know. So it is absolutely not lobbying. And I have actually put into NSF grants, I said I'm going to do a seminar at the AAAS building on New York Avenue, and I'm going to invite my friends from the FCC and NTIA and Capitol Hill and anybody else who wants to come, and we will do a seminar on this topic, and the NSF has paid for that.
And by the way, almost all of your, looking at the attendee list, almost all of you have government relations offices. Use them as a resource, both to help you navigate and stay out of jail, but also they'll be more than happy to help set up meetings and guide you through the process. So, they're a resource to be used.
And I'll note, again, not as a perfect substitute for in-person meetings, but certainly, since COVID, we're making a lot more use of Zoom and Teams and virtual type meetings that certainly keep expenses down.
And hats off to NSF too, because in a few weeks they have their NSF Spectrum Week, right? So that brings academics. I'll be there. Regulators there. So events like that are also encouraging others, right? So that's another avenue.
Well, here's another question. This one comes from Julie Knapp. Building on what Ira is suggesting, what might be most helpful is to provide information on the broader challenging issues, approaches to assessing harmful interference, state-of-the-art for filtering, reasonable expectations for receiver performance, headlights for new technologies, presented perhaps through workshops in FCC and NTIA jointly. Question, is that a possible one? Does Spectrum X provide a possible new opportunity for presenting this information with the weight of the academic community?
Yeah, again, we have done workshops in the past on specific topics when we do want to bring people in and gather information. And Julie was certainly the driving force behind a number of those. But yeah, that's another avenue. I think, unfortunately through COVID, a lot of what we had been doing simply because everybody was so far apart might have fallen off the table. But I think this is a good opportunity to start thinking about how to bring some of those things back. Like I said, some brown bag lunches, workshops on specific topics, always are very helpful. So, and yeah, we could certainly do them with NTIA when it makes sense. But yeah, that's certainly a good idea and something for us to consider and look into.
I noticed that Nick joined us. Did you want to say anything, Nick, about the role of Spectrum X in this?
We're here to help. We're from Spectrum X and we're here to help.
I know at NTIA we have something called CSMAC, right? And there are open chairs for specifically education, right? From the academic community, where NTIA gives the CSMAC subcommittee specific problems to work on, and then they write a report, right? How useful those have been and how great we've defined the problem, that's kind of another thing, but that's another venue joining CSMAC, right? So if you're in the area, again, those are also Zoom too, so you could also be on a CSMAC committee and work on actual problems that we've defined for the non-federal community to try and give us help with.
Okay, another question. We have 4 more minutes. Does the FCC NTIA see a role for academics? Oh, I'm getting automatic scrolling here, so I'm losing. Does FCC NTIA see a role for academics in doing the research that closes the feedback loop between creating rules, systems being deployed, and how things actually perform? Today, most of this feedback is submitted by industry, which may not be unbiased.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I always, we always think about that because the commercial interests are in business, and they're in business to make money, and they lobby us always with their own interests, at heart. And that's one of the things we always have to kind of sift through and kind of understand and separate the fiction from the facts and figure out how best to move forward. So certainly unbiased research, a sanity check on some of the things coming in, independent research, modeling efforts, analysis on any of the things we're looking at. Certainly would be welcome to help.
Okay, one more question. We're not going to be able to make them through all the questions. My apologies, but perhaps we can get one more in. How could academics from Europe contribute to policy making in the U.S. and vice versa? Greetings from Finland.
Well, I think we're all struggling with the same issues, whether here in Europe, Africa, Asia, in some shape or form. And we do talk to regulators all over the world all the time to understand what's happening, in various countries and see what we can learn from what they're doing. They learn from us. But that said, there's nothing, at least from the FCC process, that prevents anybody with interest from filing into our record. So again, if there's something of interest or there's research that you're working on that you think we'd be interested in, if you're in Finland or anywhere else, we'd be happy to talk to you, and your comments within the proceedings are certainly welcome.
Okay, 1 minute. I'll get one more question in. I think it's a really interesting question from Mark Norton. Can you comment on the benefits or disadvantages of NSC participation? Don't the NSC solicitations provide or suggest focus opportunities for academics? Is the FCC or NTIA engaged with NSC and some of the issues that they look at?
So so NSC is under NSC, they are doing the paths study for 3.1 gigahertz, right? Their comments that they make are to the FCC about all the other things, though. I am on those mailing lists. So in general, yes, all that is going to the FCC because we don't have a lot of public comment.
Yeah. And again, I attend the PATHS meetings, keyed into some of the NSC work. But again, if anything that gets agreed to at, through that work, it still has to go through the rulemaking process in order to become, to make it into the regulations or what the FCC endorses. So that work, the way I view it, because what I expect hopefully to come out of it is a lot of agreement among the industry players, the government players, and the academics who are all involved in a lot of that work. Mm-hmm. So if it comes to us and we take that and can put it out into a rulemaking, it should hopefully be less controversial than a lot of other things. I can't guarantee it because you never know where things are going to go. But at that point, there should be a lot of agreement, and that certainly helps pave the way for trying to adopt those rules as folks have agreed on in advance. So there's definitely a connection, but again, you can't always draw a straight line between where it starts and where it's going to end.
Right. Well, we reached the end of our hour, and I want to thank the panelists for a really interesting discussion. I've learned something from this discussion. I hope others have as well.
Well, thanks. I enjoyed it. Hope folks learned something.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for putting it in. And again, we'll put in the pitch. Get involved. There's so many different ways you can be involved. Not everyone wants to be FCC CTO, but obviously you got two of us on here, a third one definitely in the audience, chief technologist in the audience, lots of opportunities.
Yep.
Great.
Well, thank you all once again. And thank you again to Jeff for organizing this great panel. I trust that if people have more questions, they can look you up and send you an email.
Mm-hmm.
Now they can associate names and faces, so get ready. All right, we'll let everyone go. Stay tuned for the next one. Bye now.